The encounter. David's hands trembled as he adjusted his tie, standing before the towering doors of the alien warlord's throne room. The ship's metallic hum vibrated beneath his feet, a constant reminder that he was far from Earth. The diplomatic envoy sent him here to negotiate peace, but the stories he'd heard about Lady Crixa made him doubt his chances. She wasn't just a warlord. She was a conqueror, feared across the galaxy for her ruthlessness and unmatched strategic mind. The doors groaned open, revealing a hall bathed in cold, bluish light. Alien warriors, clad in spiked armor, stood in 2 rows leading up to a massive throne. Their eyes, sharp and glowing, followed David's every move. He felt like prey walking into a predator's den. Swallowing hard, he stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the metallic floor. And there she was. Lady Crixa sat on her throne, her presence overwhelming. She was taller than any human David had ever seen, with skin that shimmered like molten silver under the light. Her eyes, deep and glowing like twin stars, locked onto him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. She wore intricate armor that seemed more ceremonial than practical, adorned with symbols David couldn't begin to understand. A long curved blade rested at her side, a silent reminder of her power. "So this is the human they send to beg for mercy," Crixa said, her voice smooth, but with an edge sharp enough to cut steel. The warriors around her chuckled, their laughter low and menacing. David cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "I'm not here to beg, Lady Crixa. I'm here to negotiate peace." Her eyebrows rose, and a smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Peace? Do you understand who you're speaking to, little human? I have crushed fleets and conquered worlds. Why should I even consider peace with your kind?" David's heart raced, but he refused to back down. "Because war with humanity will cost you more than you're willing to pay. We may be smaller, weaker, but we are relentless. If you destroy one of us, 100 more will rise. Isn't it better to find common ground?" For a moment, the room was silent. Crixa leaned forward, studying him like a scientist observing a curious specimen. "You have spirit," she said finally. "Most humans tremble in my presence, yet you dare to speak boldly. Interesting." David allowed himself a brief sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. Crixa rose from her throne, her towering frame casting a shadow over him. She walked down the steps with a grace that seemed impossible for someone of her size, stopping just a few feet away. "You speak of peace," she said, circling him slowly. "Yet I see no strength in you. No reason to take your words seriously." David turned to follow her movements, his nerves on edge. "Strength isn't always about muscles or weapons, Lady Crixa. Sometimes it's about resilience and the ability to adapt." Crixa stopped in front of him, her piercing gaze boring into his. For a moment, he thought he saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of respect, perhaps, or curiosity. Then she smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. "You're mine now, human," she declared, her voice echoing through the hall. David blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." "What?" "You heard me," she said, her tone almost playful. "From this moment on, you belong to me. Consider it a new arrangement. Negotiations are over." The alien warriors erupted into cheers and laughter, clearly enjoying their leader's decision. David, on the other hand, felt his stomach drop. "Wait, you can't just claim me. I'm here as a diplomat." Crixa tilted her head, amused by his protests. "Diplomat or not, you've intrigued me, and I always take what intrigues me. Guards, escort him to my ship." 2 towering warriors stepped forward, their armored hands gripping David's arms. He struggled, but their strength was overwhelming. "This isn't how diplomacy works," he shouted, panic rising in his chest. Crixa leaned in close, her voice a low whisper. "Diplomacy is irrelevant when you're dealing with someone like me. But don't worry, human. I have plans for you." As the guards dragged him toward the exit, David's mind raced. What did she mean by plans? Was he a prisoner, a bargaining chip, or something else entirely. One thing was certain: his mission had taken a dangerous turn, and his survival now depended on understanding the mysterious and unpredictable warlord who had just claimed him. The doors closed behind him with a heavy thud, sealing his fate. Abduction or protection? The silence of the alien warship's corridors was unnerving. Every step David took echoed faintly, a reminder of how alone he felt despite the guards flanking him. The walls, crafted from a strange dark alloy, pulsed faintly with blue energy veins that seemed alive. He couldn't tell if they were lighting the way or watching him. Crix's words rang in his head. "You're mine now, human." He tried to suppress his panic, focusing instead on understanding the warlord's motives. Why had she claimed him? What did it even mean to her people? Was this some twisted form of alien courtship, a political strategy, or something far darker? David's train of thought was interrupted as the guards led him into a vast chamber. The room was circular, its high ceiling dotted with hovering orbs that cast a soft golden light. At the center stood a long, sleek table surrounded by what could only be described as alien technology: floating holograms, complex control panels, and a few weapons that made David shudder. Crixa entered moments later, her heavy boots thudding against the metallic floor. Despite the intimidating sound, her movements were as smooth as a predator stalking prey. She looked at him with an air of triumph, her silver skin glowing faintly under the light. "Welcome to my warship, human," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "Do you like it?" David hesitated. "It's impressive," he admitted, though his tone was cautious. Compliments might buy him time, but he doubted they'd save him. She smirked, clearly amused by his attempt at diplomacy. "Good. You'll be spending a lot of time here." The subtle threat in her words made his stomach tighten. "Why me?" he asked, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Out of all the humans, why did you pick me? I don't have any special skills or knowledge. I'm just a diplomat." Crixa tilted her head slightly, studying him like a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Do you really think I claimed you on a whim?" she said, her voice almost soft. "Almost. You're different from the others. You're bold, unafraid to challenge me. That makes you valuable." "Valuable how?" David pressed. His voice wavered slightly, but he held his ground. Crixa chuckled, a low, almost melodic sound. "Ah, humans. Always so full of questions." She leaned against the table, her sharp gaze never leaving him. "Let's just say I see potential in you. Potential that my enemies would kill for." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Enemies. As if on cue, a hologram blinked to life in the center of the room. It displayed an alien fleet closing in on their position. The ships were sleeker, deadlier looking than Crix's warship, and their red insignias glowed menacingly. "Speak of the devil," Crixa muttered, her smirk vanishing. She straightened and barked orders in her native tongue. Her warriors immediately scrambled into action, their movements swift and precise. David watched, confused and alarmed. "What's going on?" Crixa turned to him, her expression serious. "Those are the Ravcor, a rival faction. They've been hunting me for months, and now they've found us." David's heart raced. "And what do they want with me?" "They don't know who you are yet," Crixa said, her tone sharp. "But if they find out I've claimed a human diplomat, they'll stop at nothing to take you. To them, you're a bargaining chip, or worse." He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "So you abducted me to protect me." Crix's lips twitched into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "I don't protect anyone, human. I take what's mine and ensure no one else can have it." Her statement should have been reassuring, but it only made David feel more like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Before he could respond, the ship's alarms blared, and the hologram showed the enemy fleet launching an attack. "Strap in, human," Crixa said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is going to be rough." As the ship shuddered from the first wave of enemy fire, David found himself being pulled toward a nearby seat by one of Crix's warriors. The restraints clicked into place, holding him tightly. He could hear the booming sounds of explosions outside the hull and the rapid-fire alien language filling the room as Crixa commanded her crew. Despite the chaos, she remained calm, her every move decisive. It was as if she thrived in the heat of battle, her sharp mind working faster than the enemy's missiles. David couldn't help but be both terrified and impressed. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, and the lights flickered. Crix's voice rang out above the noise. Evasive maneuvers. Activate the energy shields. David gripped the armrests of his seat, his knuckles white. He had no control over the situation, no idea if he'd survive the next few minutes. All he could do was watch as Crixa fought to keep them alive. And yet, despite the danger, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that Crixa was right. He was important to her plans. He just didn't know why. The question burned in his mind as the ship dove into battle, Crixa at the helm, and his fate tied to hers in ways he couldn't yet understand. Rival factions strike. The warship jolted violently, throwing David against the seat restraints as the enemy barrage intensified. The deep, guttural sound of Crix's voice barking orders filled the air. The room was dimly lit now, with flashes of red and blue light coming from the ship's control panels and the holographic display in the center of the command room. The Ravcor fleet was relentless, their sleek crimson ships swarming around Crix's warship like a pack of wolves circling a wounded prey. The hologram showed their positions in vivid detail, each hostile ship marked with a glowing red dot. They were closing in fast. David turned his head toward Crixa, who stood at the helm like an unshakable pillar. Her silver skin glinted under the flickering lights, and her golden eyes burned with determination. She was shouting commands in her guttural native language, and her warriors responded with precision, their hands moving swiftly over control panels and weapon interfaces. Shields at 60%, one of her officers called out. Divert all auxiliary power to forward shields, Crixa ordered, and charge the main cannon. If they want to fight, we'll give them one. David's heart was pounding. The sheer intensity of the battle was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Earth had its conflicts, sure, but nothing could compare to the ferocity of alien warfare. Every second felt like an eternity as the ship shook under the impact of enemy fire. What do they want? David managed to shout over the chaos. Crixa glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. They want me dead. And you, if they figure out who you are, they'll take you. You're leverage they can't afford to ignore. Leverage. David's voice cracked. I didn't sign up for this. Crixa smirked despite the dire situation. You didn't sign up for anything, human. You were chosen. Before David could respond, the ship lurched again, and a deafening boom echoed through the chamber. The hologram showed one of the enemy ships breaking formation, its engine sputtering as it spiraled out of control. The warriors on Crix's crew let out a collective cheer, but their victory was short-lived. They're boarding us, one of the officers shouted. David felt a chill run down his spine. Boarding. The idea of armed Ravcor soldiers storming the ship was far worse than the distant threat of lasers and missiles. His mind raced with images of hulking alien brutes breaking through the doors, their weapons trained on him. Crixa didn't hesitate. She turned to her crew, her voice commanding and steady. Prepare for close combat. Protect the human at all costs. David's stomach dropped. Wait, what do you mean protect the human? I'm not some precious cargo. She stepped closer to him, her towering presence making him feel even smaller. You are precious cargo, whether you like it or not. Now stay here and don't get in my way. Before he could argue, Crixa turned and drew her weapon, a long curved blade that shimmered with energy. Her crew followed suit, readying their alien weapons as the sound of grinding metal filled the air. The enemy was cutting through the ship's outer hull. David's instincts screamed at him to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The ship's alarms blared, and the lights flickered as the enemy breach grew closer. His pulse quickened with every second. The first Ravcor soldier burst through the door, a towering figure with crimson skin and jagged armor. It let out a guttural roar, brandishing a wicked-looking plasma blade. Crixa didn't flinch. She moved faster than David thought possible, closing the distance and striking with precision. Her blade hummed as it sliced through the soldier's armor, dropping him to the ground in one fluid motion. More Ravcor poured in, their weapons firing plasma bolts that lit up the room. Crix's warriors engaged them with ferocity, the clash of blades and the sizzle of energy weapons creating a deafening cacophony. The air was thick with tension and the smell of scorched metal. David ducked behind a console, his heart hammering in his chest. He was completely out of his depth. He had no weapon, no training, just a front-row seat to a battle that would decide his fate. Amid the chaos, Crix's voice rang out. "David, stay low." He barely had time to register her warning before a Ravcor soldier spotted him. The alien lunged, its blade raised high. David froze, his mind blank with fear. But before the weapon could strike, Crixa intercepted the attacker, her blade cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. The soldier crumpled at her feet. She turned to him, her expression fierce. "I told you to stay out of sight." David swallowed hard, nodding. Noted. The battle raged on, but Crixa and her crew were relentless. Slowly but surely, they pushed the Ravcor back. The ship's corridors were littered with the bodies of fallen invaders, and the once deafening sounds of combat began to fade. When the last enemy was defeated, Crixa stood amidst the carnage, her blade dripping with alien blood. She looked at David, her expression unreadable. "You've seen what they're capable of," she said, her voice low but steady. "Now do you understand why I claimed you?" David stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't understand, not fully. But one thing was clear: whatever game Crixa was playing, he was a part of it now, and there was no turning back. Secrets revealed. David sat in the corner of the warship's dimly lit quarters, his back against the cold, metallic wall. His mind was still reeling from the chaos of the recent battle. The Ravcor had been repelled, but the experience left him shaken. He kept replaying Crix's words in his mind. "Now do you understand why I claimed you?" But he didn't understand. Not fully. The door to the quarters slid open with a quiet hiss, and Crixa entered. She moved with her usual air of authority, her silver skin glinting faintly under the room's pale lighting. Her armor was gone, replaced by a simpler outfit that seemed more suited for comfort than battle. Yet she still carried her energy blade at her side, a constant reminder of her power. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Crixa said, her voice a mix of mockery and concern. She crossed the room and leaned against a console, her golden eyes studying him. "I told you to stay out of the way. You're lucky to be alive." David exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. "Lucky. That's one way to put it. Another way is that I'm in over my head, and I still don't understand why you dragged me into this." Crixa tilted her head, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then she pushed off the console and walked closer, towering over him. "You're not here by accident, human," she began, her tone unusually serious. "When I claimed you, it wasn't a whim. It was a choice, one I made because of who you are and what you are." David frowned. Confusion etched across his face. "What I am? I'm just a diplomat. A very unlucky one, apparently." Crix's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "You're more than that, David, whether you realize it or not." She turned away and activated a holographic display. The glowing blue screen showed a complex map of genetic sequences and data that meant nothing to David. He stood and walked closer, his curiosity overriding his fear. "What is this?" he asked. "This," Crixa said, gesturing to the display, "is your genetic profile." David blinked. "My? What? How do you even have that?" "Your people are naive," she replied, her tone almost dismissive. "You think diplomacy is about words and gestures. My people understand it's also about information. We've been studying humans for decades, collecting data, analyzing your strengths and weaknesses. He felt a chill run down his spine. And what does this have to do with me? Crixa tapped a glowing section of the display, zooming in on a specific sequence. You have a genetic anomaly, a rare trait that doesn't exist in my species, or any other species we've encountered. It's something that could save my people. David stared at her, trying to process her words. Save your people? From what? Crix's expression darkened, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. My empire is crumbling, she admitted. Decades of war have taken their toll. Our population is dwindling, our resources stretched thin. And there's something else, a genetic decay that's weakening us from within. She paused, as if the weight of the admission was too much to bear. Then she continued, her voice softer. Your genetic anomaly might hold the key to reversing that decay. If we can harness it, we might be able to save my people from extinction. David took a step back, his mind racing. So that's why you claimed me. On some kind of science experiment. Crixa turned to face him, her golden eyes locking onto his. You're not an experiment, David. You're a solution. And whether you like it or not, your survival is now tied to the survival of my empire. He shook his head, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what she was saying. This doesn't make sense. I didn't ask for any of this. I'm just a human. Crixa interrupted, her voice firm. But you're not just anything. You're unique, and that makes you valuable. To me, and to anyone who knows what you are. David sat down heavily on the nearest chair, his head in his hands. The weight of her words pressed down on him like a crushing burden. He had come here to negotiate peace, to be a mediator between worlds. Now he was at the center of a conflict far bigger than he'd ever imagined. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Crix's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a surprisingly gentle gesture, considering her usual demeanor. Now we survive, and we figure out how to use what you have to save us both. David looked up at her, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. And if I refuse? Her grip on his shoulder tightened slightly, not in anger, but in a way that conveyed the seriousness of her response. You don't have that choice, human. Not anymore. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. David realized then that his life would never be the same. Whatever fate awaited him, it was now intertwined with Crix's and the survival of her people. Trust tested. The tension in the warship's command quarters was palpable as David followed Crixa into a smaller chamber she referred to as her strategy room. The RAF Corps assault had left scars on the ship, flickering lights, scorch marks on the walls, and a faint smell of burnt metal in the air. Yet, the crew carried on with unwavering precision, each warrior seemingly born for battle. David, by contrast, felt out of place, an unarmed and untrained human surrounded by alien warriors who viewed him as little more than a fragile oddity. Crixa gestured for him to sit at a metallic bench near the center of the room. The chamber was dimly lit, with holographic maps and tactical displays projected onto the walls. It was both intimidating and mesmerizing, a visual representation of the power and intellect Crixa wielded. Sit, she ordered, her voice as sharp as ever. David hesitated but complied, lowering himself onto the cold bench. He was beginning to understand that Crix's tone wasn't optional. It was a command backed by years of unchallenged authority. She stood across from him, arms crossed, her golden eyes boring into him. You're afraid, she said matter-of-factly. Of course, I'm afraid. David snapped before he could stop himself. He regretted it immediately, but Crixa didn't seem offended. If anything, she looked amused. Good, she replied. Fear keeps you alert, but if you let it control you, it will be your undoing. David exhaled, his frustration bubbling to the surface. Why does it matter if I'm afraid or not? I didn't sign up for any of this. I'm not a warrior. I'm not even particularly brave. I'm just a guy trying to figure out why I'm suddenly the centerpiece of some galactic crisis. Crixus stepped closer, her imposing figure casting a shadow over him. You're more than that, she said, her voice lower now, almost gentle. You just don't see it yet, but you will. Her words hung in the air, cryptic and frustrating. David rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of everything. He glanced at the maps glowing on the walls, showing alien star systems, fleet movements, and unfamiliar symbols. It was a lot to take in. I don't trust you, he admitted, breaking the silence. Crixus raised an eyebrow, as if the statement amused her. And why would you? Trust isn't given freely, human. It's earned. David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Then earn it. Tell me the truth. What happens if I can't help you? What happens if this genetic anomaly you're so obsessed with doesn't save your people? Crix's expression darkened, and for a moment, David thought he had pushed too far. But then, she surprised him. She sat down across from him, folding her hands on the table between them. Then my empire falls, she said bluntly. My people die out, and the Ravcor, along with every other scavenger in the galaxy, will descend upon what's left of us like vultures. We'll be erased from history. Her honesty caught him off guard. He expected deflection, maybe another cryptic answer, but not this. He saw something in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or the weight of responsibility that came with being a leader. It was the first time she seemed less like a warlord and more like a person. And me? He asked softly. What happens to me if I fail? You won't fail, Crixus said immediately. There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. I've chosen you for a reason. You'll rise to the challenge because you must. Failure isn't an option. David leaned back, her unwavering confidence both inspiring and terrifying. You're awfully sure of yourself. She smirked. I have to be. If I waver, my people lose faith. And without faith, there's no empire. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. One of Crix's officers entered, bowing slightly before addressing her in their native language. David didn't understand the words, but the urgency in the officer's tone was clear. What is it? David asked after the officer left. Crixus stood, her demeanor instantly shifting back to that of a commanding warlord. One of my crew has been caught trying to send a message to the Ravcor. A traitor. David's stomach sank. A spy. On your own ship. Loyalty isn't guaranteed, Crixus said, her voice cold. Desperation makes people do foolish things. She turned to leave, but David stopped her. Wait, what are you going to do? What must be done? She replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. I'll question the traitor myself. If they're working with the Ravcor, they'll wish they weren't. David wanted to protest, to suggest a less severe approach, but he held his tongue. He was beginning to understand that Crix's world operated on rules he couldn't fully grasp, and for better or worse, he was now a part of that world. As the door slid shut behind her, David sat in silence, grappling with the realization that his survival depended not only on Crix's protection, but also on her ability to maintain control of her ship and crew. Trust, as she had said, wasn't given freely, but if he was going to survive, and perhaps even help her, he'd have to start finding a way to earn hers. The final battle. The warship's atmosphere was charged with anticipation, every corridor bustling with preparation for the looming confrontation. The Ravcor fleet had regrouped and was closing in fast, their numbers now nearly double what they were before. David stood in the war room, surrounded by holographic displays of enemy formations and tactical overlays, feeling completely out of his depth. Crixa, on the other hand, thrived in the chaos. She moved from console to console, issuing commands in her native tongue with the precision of a seasoned tactician. Her golden eyes burned with determination, and her silver skin seemed to shimmer brighter under the dim emergency lights. Despite the looming threat, she radiated an aura of confidence that bordered on defiance. We can't take them head-on, one of her officers said in the guttural alien language. David didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear, laced with desperation. Crixa silenced the room with a single glance. "We don't need to take them head-on," she said, switching to the universal translator so everyone, including David, could understand. "We outthink them, and we use every resource at our disposal." David shifted uncomfortably as her eyes flicked to him for a brief moment. He wasn't sure if he counted as a resource or just a liability. "You," Crixa said suddenly, pointing at him. David blinked, startled. "Me? Yes, you. You're going to help me." He laughed nervously. "I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not exactly military material. I don't even know how to fire a weapon." "I don't need you to fight," Crixa replied, her tone sharp. "I need your mind." David frowned, confused. "My mind?" Crixa stepped closer, her towering presence making him feel even smaller. "Humans think differently than my people. You find solutions in chaos, adapt in ways we can't. If we're going to survive this, I need you to think like a human." Her words were both a compliment and a challenge, and David wasn't sure he liked either. But the weight of the moment pressed down on him, and he realized he didn't have the luxury of refusing. He swallowed hard and nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Crixa turned to the holographic display and began outlining her plan. The RAV Corps were advancing in a tight formation, their ships clustered to maximize firepower. It was an effective strategy against most enemies, but it also left them vulnerable to a coordinated counterattack. "They'll expect us to retreat or engage directly," Crixa explained. "But we'll do neither. Instead, we'll lure them into the debris field near the Actrell Nebula. The field is dense with asteroids and remnants of old battleships, perfect for an ambush." David studied the map, his mind racing. "That's a good start, but what happens when they realize it's a trap?" "They'll scatter, and you'll lose your advantage." Crixa nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Exactly. That's where you come in." She pointed to a smaller hologram of her warship. "Our ship's energy signature is unique. It's how they're tracking us. But if we can use that to our advantage, we might be able to mislead them." David's brow furrowed as he studied the data. "You're saying we create a decoy?" "Not just one," Crixa said. 5. We'll generate false energy signatures in the debris field to confuse their scanners. They won't know which ship to target." David's mind clicked into gear, and he began piecing the plan together. "And while they're distracted, you can pick them off one by one. It's risky, but it could work." Crixa grinned, a rare expression that looked almost out of place on her usually stoic face. "You're learning, human." The crew quickly set to work implementing the plan, with David assisting where he could. He helped calibrate the decoy devices, his technical background, limited as it was, proving useful in the absence of more skilled engineers. Despite the alien technology, he found himself adapting surprisingly quickly, his fear gradually giving way to focus. When the RAV Corps fleet arrived at the debris field, the trap was set. Crix's warship drifted silently among the wreckage, its energy signature suppressed to match the decoys scattered around them. The enemy ships entered cautiously, their scanners lighting up with multiple targets. "Hold position," Crixa ordered, her voice calm and steady. "Let them come to us." David stood near her, his heart pounding. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as they watched the enemy fleet on the holographic display. One by one, the RAV Corps ships began splitting off to investigate the false signals. "Now," Crixa said, her golden eyes blazing. The warship's cannons roared to life, their energy bolts tearing through the nearest RAV Corps vessel. The explosion lit up the debris field, and chaos erupted as the remaining enemy ships scrambled to regroup. Crix's crew moved with precision, exploiting the confusion to launch a series of calculated strikes. David watched in awe as the RAV Corps fleet fell apart, their superior numbers rendered useless by Crix's strategy. But the victory wasn't without cost. One of the decoy devices malfunctioned, and a Ravkor ship locked onto their position. The enemy vessel charged forward, its weapons firing relentlessly. The warship shuddered under the impact, and alarms blared throughout the command room. David turned to Crixa, panic in his eyes. What do we do? Crixa's jaw tightened. We fight. She took the helm, her hands flying over the controls as she maneuvered the warship through the debris field. The enemy ship pursued relentlessly, its weapons scorching the hull. David, Crixa barked. I need you to activate the aft cannons manually. The targeting system is down. He froze for a moment, then nodded and rushed to the console. His hands trembled as he worked, his lack of experience making every second feel like an eternity. But somehow he managed to align the cannons. Fire, Crixa shouted. David hit the button, and the aft cannons unleashed a barrage of energy bolts. The enemy ship was caught off guard, its shields failing under the assault. With a final explosion, it disintegrated into a fiery cloud of debris. The room fell silent, save for the sound of labored breathing and the faint hum of the ship's systems. Crixa turned to David, her expression unreadable. You did well, she said simply. David exhaled, the weight of the moment finally catching up to him. He wasn't a soldier, but he had survived. And somehow, he had made a difference. As the warship limped away from the debris field, he realized that Crix's trust in him wasn't misplaced. And for the first time, he felt a spark of trust in her too. A new beginning. The warship drifted through the void, the wreckage of the Ravkor fleet fading into the distance. The once vibrant hum of the ship's engines was now subdued, reflecting the exhaustion of its crew. The final battle had been a victory, but it had come at a cost. Systems were damaged, and the casualties among Crix's warriors were a sobering reminder of the dangers they faced. David stood by a viewport, gazing out at the stars. The vastness of space seemed both beautiful and oppressive, a constant reminder of how small he was in the grand scheme of things. He was alive, but his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief, guilt, fear, and something else he couldn't quite place. Behind him, the door hissed open, and he heard the familiar sound of Crix's boots against the floor. She approached him silently, her presence as commanding as ever. Even without her armor, she exuded authority. But there was a softness to her tone when she spoke. "You're quiet," she observed. David turned to face her, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. "What am I supposed to say? That I'm grateful for being thrown into the middle of an intergalactic war. That I'm thrilled about almost dying again." Crix's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "You survived. That's more than most would have managed." "Survived," David echoed, his voice rising. "Barely. And let's not forget, I didn't exactly volunteer for any of this." Crixa tilted her head, her golden eyes studying him with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper. "No, you didn't. But you adapted. You fought. And you proved you're stronger than you think." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't feel strong. I feel lost. Everything I knew, everything I was. It's all gone. What am I supposed to do now?" Crixa stepped closer, her towering presence casting a shadow over him. But instead of intimidation, there was an unexpected gentleness in her demeanor. "You have a choice, human. You can return to Earth, to the life you knew, or you can stay and forge a new path." David frowned, his thoughts racing. "Stay. And do what? Become part of your empire. I'm not a warrior. I don't belong here." Crix's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was firm but not unkind. "Belonging isn't something given, David. It's something you earn. You've already proven yourself in ways my people respect. If you choose to stay, you'll have a purpose, and you'll have me." Her word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. David met her gaze, searching for any hint of deception, but found none. For all her ruthless reputation, Crixa was being honest. She wasn't offering a life free of challenges or danger, But she was offering something he hadn't expected: trust, and perhaps even companionship. "And if I go back?" he asked quietly. Her hand fell away, and her expression became unreadable. "Then I'll ensure you return safely to your planet. But make no mistake, your world will see you differently. You've been to the stars, fought alongside aliens, and survived against impossible odds. You'll never be the same person who left." David turned back to the viewport, his thoughts a chaotic mess. She was right. The man who had stepped onto that diplomatic shuttle felt like a stranger now. He had been thrust into a galaxy of conflict and uncertainty, but he had also found something he hadn't expected: his own resilience. The silence stretched between them until Crixus spoke again, her tone softer than before. "You're not just a pawn in some galactic game, David. You're more than that. Whether you stay or go, you've earned my respect. And that's not something I give lightly." David let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. Respect from an alien warlord. That's something to put on a resume. Crixus smirked, but her gaze remained steady. "It's a rare honor." He turned to face her fully, his decision still uncertain. "If I stay, what happens next?" Her expression shifted, and for the first time, she looked almost hopeful. "Next, we rebuild. My empire is fragile, but with your help, it might stand a chance, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to ensure that both our peoples survive." The weight of her words settled on him, and David realized the enormity of what she was offering. It wasn't just about survival. It was about forging a future, one built on trust and cooperation between two very different worlds. It was a daunting prospect, but it was also one filled with possibility. He took a deep breath, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "You're not making this easy, you know." Crix's smirk returned, though there was a warmth in her eyes now. "I don't do easy, human. Neither should you." David chuckled despite himself, the first genuine laugh he'd had in what felt like forever. He didn't have all the answers, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't need them right now. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. "All right," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "Let's see what this new beginning looks like." Crixa nodded, her golden eyes gleaming with approval. "Good. You won't regret it." As the warship continued its journey through the stars, David couldn't help but feel that he was stepping into something far bigger than himself. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't face it alone.